All right, hello everybody, and welcome to my presentation on Jane Austen's novel Mansfield Park. So, I originally picked this because I was so sick of reading books about suicide and death and just all this negative stuff. And since we're in quarantine, I'm already sad because of isolation, so I don't need that extra sadness. Um, so yeah, I just asked Miss Childers, what is the book with the happiest ending? And she said this one. So I just went with it. So hopefully you enjoy this and you learn a bit more about Mansfield Park or just anything about Mansfield Park. So yeah, let's jump into it. So before you can understand what a book is about, you need to know more about the author's perspective. So obviously the author is Jane Austen. She's very famous for her novels such as Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, but sadly Mansfield Park is not up there on the list. She was an English novelist born in 1775. Most of her storylines, if not all, reflect the image of English courtship and marriage. They also are, they highly parallel her life stories, her experiences with love. And Jane Austen, actually, it must be noted, she was never married because her heart was broken. She was denied the right to marry her love interest because his parents told her that she was of a lower class. And when she and Tom, his name was, tried to pursue each other, Tom's parents forbid her forever seeing their son again. So she was very heartbroken by that. And that's where we're going to see a lot of the themes of true love throughout Mansfield, especially. So Jane Austen actually desired for her novels to entertain her audiences while having moral purpose. She was raised where she developed a high moral compass. So scholars actually say that Mansfield Park is the most prominent display of Austen's beliefs. We'll get a bit more into the summary in a couple slides from now, but one of the most scenes, the scene where we can see this the most is when the characters are trying to put on a play called Lover's Vows. And this play was very controversial, very scandalous in the early 1800s. And we see Austen's beliefs through the main character, Fanny Price's rejection of even participating or being in the same room that play is taking place. So we can see a lot of parallels with her life and her beliefs through her novels. So, a little bit of the background. Mansfield Park is set in northern Hampshire, England, in the early 1800s. So, this was a time where women were expected to be proper and marry into wealthy families to better the name of the family they are coming out of. Now, women were supposed to be very soft spoken, very graceful, and elegant. Um, and this is why Mansfield Park is overlooked as a novel because the main character reflects a lot of those qualities of what was expected of a woman in the early 1800s. But we'll get into that a little later. This novel is actually the least romantic and has very abrupt and straightforward diction. It is told in the third person, omniscient perspective. Say that 5 times fast. So that way we can see what Fanny Price, the main character, is feeling and thinking, while also getting a glimpse into the other characters' perspectives as well. Okay, in the beginning, we have three sisters. One sister marries marries into the upper class. Her name is Miss Bertram. The next sister marries into the middle class. She marries a clergyman, and her name is Mrs. Norris. And then the other sister marries for love. So she is actually going to be impoverished because she marries into a very poor family. Her name is Mrs. Price. So the main character, Fanny, is actually one of the 8 children Mrs. Price has. She's the oldest. So the Prices, because they can't afford to take on 8 children, take care of 8 children, they appeal to Mrs. Price's eldest sister, Mrs. Bertram, who married Sir Thomas Bertram, owner of Mansfield Park, to take in their daughter Fanny so that they can give her a better future. So Fanny arrives at Mansfield Park at age 10. She's very quiet and reserved, and we don't know much about her character at this point. except that she's very scared and she feels like she doesn't belong. She grows up alongside her spoiled cousins, Julia Bertram and Maria Bertram, and also her cousin Tom and her cousin Edmund. Now, Edmund's the one who's really going to be kind to Fanny and bring her out of her shell and just show her compassion and understanding, while everyone else is just kind of looking down upon her because of her status. So as they grow older, Fanny still comes out of her shell, but she's very, very shy and quiet and kind of disregarded by Maria and Julia, and even Mrs. Norris, the the middle sister who married a clergyman. Mrs. Norris is constantly belittling her, telling her she's not worth it, and she should always think of herself as the lowest. Next, we have the arrival of the Crawfords. Now, the arrival of the Crawfords brings out kind of a little social circle um, that consists of Mr. Rushworth, Maria's fiance, who she rushes into the marriage because of she's very entranced by all his material things. We'll get into that a little later. Um, the Crawfords are wealthy and they capture the heart of Edmund. Miss Crawford captures his heart and kind of distracts him from Fanny. And then Henry Crawford proceeds to fall in love with Fanny. When she refuses his marriage proposal because she doesn't truly love him, her uncle is very, very upset with her because he believes that was her only shot at becoming truly accepted into the upper class. So to remind her of what she has, of what she was missing out on, he sends her back to her home in Portsmouth, where she was taken out of to be raised at the park, where Fanny realizes just how fortunate she was. Next, Miss Crawford writes to Fanny telling her to believe nothing of what she hears. So Fanny gets back to the park and reads a newspaper that says that Henry Crawford and the married Maria Bertram have now gone and had an affair. So they bring shame and disgrace upon their entire family. And it's a good thing that Fanny did not say yes to Crawford's marriage proposal, or else she would have been brought into that shame and disgrace. But she ends up marrying Edmund. As much as I hate that she marries her cousin, she does because she truly loves him, and Edmund ends up truly loving her, and they live happily ever after in the park, which is kind of ironic that she, as the lower class citizen, inherits Mansfield Park rather than her two cousins, because they disgraced and brought shame to their family. Oh, excuse me. So let's dive a little bit into the character of Fanny Price. So she is actually the most controversial heroine in all of Austen's novels. The reason why Mansfield Park is not highly regarded today is because of this character, actually. Fanny is very shy and timid. She doesn't express herself very well. She's not confident. She doesn't have a high self-esteem. Yet she's regarded for her moral strength rather than her physical strength. Being morally grounded in her beliefs saves her from a lot of trouble, as we see earlier. It saves her from getting involved in the marriage of Henry Crawford. She really thinks things through. She's highly intelligent. And because of that, because she's quiet but very wise, all of the characters in the novel seek her counsel. They seek her advice. So I have this quote from Miss Crawford. It says, "You have so much heart among you than one finds in the world at large." See, at this time, the upper class are portrayed as so arrogant in this novel, and Fanny is so level-headed. She's very steady, and that's why all the characters kind of can find this rest and security in her presence. Sadly, as I mentioned earlier, her character is molded by the constant belittlement of Mrs. Norris, because Miss Norris is very envious of Fanny. It's very obvious that she didn't have the opportunity, that Fanny was brought from the lower class to the upper class very quickly, and Mrs. Norris is just kind of stuck wishing she had a better future in the upper class. So she constantly she says these nasty things to Fanny, quote, "Remember, wherever you are, you must be the lowest and the last." And this kind of installs a meekness in Fanny. She doesn't speak her opinion because she believes that her opinion is not valued. And it's really, really tragic. So in the beginning, Fanny is very frail as a 10-year-old. She's physically frail, she's passive, she doesn't speak her mind because she's shy, and she's very, very timid. But Edmund kind of brings out a side to her, and she evolves into this she's still very quiet, but she has an idea of who she is as a person. We see in the next slide, I'm going to say she sits alone rather than entertains conflict. She's not going to get herself involved, like I mentioned in the lover's vows. She's very strong mentally. Then finally, in the end of the novel, Fanny is morally sound. Is confident in her beliefs, and she's very intelligent. So some of the prominent symbols that at least stood out to me in this novel, we'll start with the gate at Sotherton. Now, the character of Mr. Rushworth, who I mentioned earlier, he is Maria Bertram's fiance in the first half of the novel. So he is very concerned with what others think of him. He's very insecure, despite the fact that he's secure financially. So while he's trying to show off to the group, he brings them all up to his manor at Sotherton, and he forgets his keys. So rather than waiting on Mr. Rushworth to get his keys, despite the fact that they don't know anything about the lay of the land, they don't know where they're going, Maria Bertram and Henry Crawford arrogantly hop the fence into the manor because they are impatient. Succumbing to peer pressure, Julia Bertram joins also. When Fanny is asked to come, she says no. This kind of foreshadows Maria and Henry's demise, how they arrogantly ignored all reason and jumped into a relationship with each other. They had an affair with each other and ultimately brought shame and disgrace because they did not think things through, unlike Fanny. Next, we have the symbol of the golden chains. So, William Price, Fanny's brother, sends Fanny a amber cross, which she loves dearly, but Fanny's disappointed because she doesn't have a chain to wear the cross on her neck with. Mrs. Crawford, or Miss Crawford, Henry Crawford, through Miss Crawford, I should say, presents Fanny Price with a chain. It's very big and bulky, and it doesn't fit the simple little cross. Later, Edmund gives Fanny a chain that's very simple but delicate and just very elegant, but it's very plain at the same time. So this kind of symbolizes Fanny's relationship with Henry Crawford, how he's very extravagant for her taste. It didn't quite fit her personality, and it ultimately would lead to destruction in the end. And then Edmund's chain kind of foreshadows the working out of their relationship at the end. So let's jump into some themes of the novel, and these two are presented beautifully, in my opinion. We have the theme of love. So as mentioned earlier, Jane Austen had a not so great experience with love, so here she presents 3 types of love. We have materialistic. This is best displayed by the upper class, how they are marrying to further their social status, to further their titles. We have, quote, Rushworth was from the first struck with the beauty of Miss Bertram, and, being inclined to marry, soon fancied himself in love. As you can see here, he's not marrying for love at all. He's marrying because Maria Bertram served as a trophy wife for him, just something to further his status, to further his image. He already had all of the wealth and the security financially, but Maria Bertram was kind of like the cherry on top to his life. And we see how this ends up in the end. It doesn't work out well. So Austen was kind of defying the societal norm of marrying for money by saying, hey, this is not going to work out. It's going to lead to destruction and ultimately unfulfillment. Next, we have fraternal love. And many times, the character of Fanny Price is best seen when she's with William, her true self, her true joyful self, because William brings that out of her. Austen, through the novel, mentions many times that there's no such thing There is not such a thing as fraternal love, as blood love. It's incomparable to any kind of love. Um, Quote, but with William and Fanny Price, it, referring to love, was still sentiment in all its prime and freshness, wounded by no opposition of interest, cooled by no separate attachment, and feeling the influence of time and absence in only its increase. Next, we have pure love, wedded in this case, fulfillment by marriage. So we see this when Fanny refuses Crawford and ends up marrying Edmund. And, quote, with so much true merit and true love, and no want of fortune and friends, the happiness of the married cousins must appear as secure as earthly happiness can be. So this type of love is it's actually called true love, addressed directly as true love in the novel. And Austen is trying to make the point that it doesn't matter what your class is, it doesn't matter who you are, if you're trying to get a better title, you're going to be fulfilled as a person if you marry for love. And I couldn't have said it better myself. And this novel portrays, quote, there are as many forms of love as there are moments in time. So Austen was just trying to show a couple various examples. So the idea of materialistic love kind of ties into the theme of class. Now, this is most obviously represented by the three sisters in the beginning, Miss Bertram representing the upper class, Mrs. Norris representing the middle class, marrying a clergyman, and Mrs. Price representing the impoverished or lower class. We also see the theme of class through the endings for the Miss Bertrams and Fanny. The upper class is not fulfilled in the end, and it's a very stale relationship. And then we have Fanny, who symbolizes, going from the lower class to the upper class, and ultimately tying into the theme of love by being fulfilled. Next, we have the juxtaposition between Miss Crawford and Fanny. It shows the desires of the higher class compared to just the humble mindset of Fanny. Quote, Miss Crawford was very unlike her, referring to Fanny. She had none of Fanny's delicacy of taste, of mind, of feeling she saw in nature, inanimate nature, with little observation. Her attention was all for men and women, her talents for the light and the lively. So ultimately, we see Fanny as someone who, because of her humble beginning, she appreciates everything where she is brought. And this is all she is brought to, I meant to say. And this is best evidence when she realizes how fortunate she was to have Mansfield Park as a home during her time at Portsmouth. So why should Mansfield Park be remembered today? What was the impact that it had? So I believe that the societal message about marriage is very important to readers of the early 1800s. It shows through the characters of Miss Bertram and the upper class that marrying for class and money leads to ruin. Morality leads to happiness. So I believe Austen was trying to communicate this through her three prominent characters in the novel. We have Maria Bertram. So as I mentioned earlier, she disgraces her family despite her great and moral upbringing. Um, we see through her the love of money. She's very materialistic, which just leads to her being forever disgraced. Nothing was instilled in her, nothing was taught. She just married for the sake of marrying someone with a title. Next, we have kind of the mediator between the two, Mary Crawford. Now, Mary has a bit more of a head on her shoulders than Maria. However, she refuses and misses out on marrying Edmund because when he told her he wanted to be a clergyman, she immediately told him, oh no, clergymen have little influence. I can't be involved with you anymore. So that's very sad. Nothing much is mentioned about who she ends up with because, again, there's no real fulfillment in relationships like those. And finally, Fanny Price, the main character herself, because she is patient and because she trusts herself, she didn't find her security in the attention of a man with title. She found the security in her moral compass, and she marries for love, which ultimately shifts in her favor. Ironically, she's the one who inherits Mansfield Park. She's the one who gains the most happiness by marrying Edmund. So, to wrap things up a little bit, I have my favorite quote, and not to be all Disney Channel on everybody, but as I was going through the quotes, this one really stuck out to me. Quote, "We have all a better guide in ourselves if we would attend to it than any other person can be." Now, this is what really makes Fanny stand out as a heroine, that she didn't need the affirmation from others to be confident in her beliefs. Yes, she was not secure in her appearance, but it also meant that she was not vain like her sisters or her cousins, I mean. This is why Fanny should be a heroine, because she was very confident in who she was as a person. She was level-headed, and it saved her from a lot of conflict. And to me, that is so attractive. It is something I really want to reflect, to not worry about societal norms, what society expects from me, just to be confident in my beliefs and my moral ground. So, I hope you understand more about Mansfield Park. I would encourage you to read it. It is a little slow in the middle, but it's really a great lesson on staying grounded in who you are, and just to give you a little bit more historical context on the early 1800s. I hope you enjoyed, and I will stop talking now. Don't worry.